Before the first rays of sunlight touched the waters of Lake Champlain, a small group of determined men climbed quietly into wooden boats. The morning air was cold, the lake was covered in darkness, and every splash of an oar echoed across the silent water. Fewer than 100 volunteers were about to risk everything on a mission that many believed was impossible. They were not marching with thousands of soldiers. They carried no massive army behind them. Yet before the sun had fully risen, they would capture one of the most important military forts in North America without fighting a major battle. This is the remarkable story of Fort Ticonderoga. To understand why this mission mattered, we first need to understand the fort itself. Fort Ticonderoga stands at one of the most strategic locations in northeastern America, where Lake Champlain connects to the route leading toward Lake George and the Hudson Valley. Long before European armies arrived, Native American nations recognized the importance of this narrow passage. The name Ticonderoga is believed to come from an Iroquoian word describing the meeting of two waterways, a place where travelers, traders, and warriors had passed for generations. During the French and Indian War, the French built a powerful fortress here in 1755, calling it Fort Carillon. Massive stone walls, thick earthworks, and heavy cannons protected one of the most valuable transportation routes on the continent. Whoever controlled this crossing could move armies between Canada and the British colonies to the south. In 1758, British forces launched a huge assault against the fort. Although they greatly outnumbered the French defenders, they suffered a disastrous defeat after attacking well-prepared defensive positions. The battle became one of Britain's worst military failures in North America. A year later, however, the French abandoned the fort as larger British armies advanced through the region. The British repaired the damaged defenses and renamed it Fort Ticonderoga. For several years, the fort remained an important military outpost, but by 1775, everything had changed. The American colonies were moving toward open rebellion against British rule. Tensions had been growing for years over taxes, political representation, and increasing British control. Then, in April 1775, fighting finally broke out at Lexington and Concord. News of the first battles spread rapidly throughout the colonies. Suddenly, both sides realized that a much larger war had begun. While Patriot leaders searched for ways to defend themselves, one major problem quickly became obvious. The colonial forces had brave volunteers. They had determination, but they had very little heavy artillery. Without powerful cannons, it would be nearly impossible to challenge British strongholds or defend major cities. Military leaders across New England began looking toward a forgotten fortress on Lake Champlain. Fort Ticonderoga still contained dozens of valuable cannons, mortars, and military supplies. Better still, intelligence reports suggested that the British garrison was surprisingly small. The once mighty fortress had fallen into neglect. Many sections needed repair. Only a small number of British soldiers remained to guard it. Some were older veterans no longer suited for demanding campaigns, while others struggled with poor health. Families also lived inside the fort, including women and children who shared daily life with the soldiers. For the Americans, the opportunity seemed almost unbelievable. If they could capture the fort before Britain sent reinforcements, they would gain enough artillery to strengthen the entire revolutionary cause. Soon, volunteers from different colonies began gathering for a bold mission that would rely not on overwhelming force, but on speed, secrecy, and surprise. Among those volunteers was a fearless frontier leader named Ethan Allen. He arrived with his famous Green Mountain Boys, experienced fighters who knew the rugged wilderness better than almost anyone else. Confident and outspoken, Allen believed he should command the expedition. But before the operation could begin, another determined officer arrived with official orders from Massachusetts. His name was Benedict Arnold. Neither man was willing to step aside, and their disagreement almost threatened the mission before it had even begun. Despite their disagreement, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold both understood that failure was not an option. After a tense argument, they reached an uneasy compromise. The two men would lead the attack together. Personal pride would have to wait. The mission came first. Before dawn on May 10, 1775, only about 83 men managed to cross the narrow stretch of Lake Champlain. There were not enough boats to carry everyone at once, and Allen knew that waiting for the rest of his force could cost them the element of surprise. He made a bold decision. The attack would begin immediately. The boats slipped silently across the dark water until they reached the western shore. The volunteers climbed onto land and moved quickly toward the sleeping fortress. The morning was calm, and the British guards had little reason to expect an attack. Within moments, the Americans rushed through the entrance and spread across the parade ground. Confused soldiers stumbled from their quarters, many still half asleep. There was almost no organized resistance. The fort's commander, Captain William Delaplace, was awakened by the noise and hurried outside to discover armed patriots already inside the walls. According to Ethan Allen's later account, he demanded the fort's surrender in the name of the Great Jehovah and the Continental Congress. Historians still debate whether those were his exact words, but there is no doubt about what happened next. Captain Delaplace realized that resistance would only lead to unnecessary bloodshed. He surrendered the fort. The entire operation had taken only minutes. Remarkably, almost no one was killed, and one of Britain's most important frontier forts had fallen without a major battle. It was one of the earliest and most surprising victories of the American Revolution. But the greatest prize was not the fort itself, it was the artillery. Inside Fort Ticonderoga stood dozens of cannons, mortars, howitzers, ammunition, and military supplies that the Continental Army desperately needed. At that moment, George Washington was surrounding British forces in Boston, but his army lacked the heavy guns necessary to force them out. That problem would soon be solved by another remarkable American officer. His name was Henry Knox. During the winter of 1775 and early 1776, Knox organized one of the most extraordinary logistical operations in American history. Using sleds, oxen, horses, and sheer determination, he transported 59 captured artillery pieces, more than 300 miles across frozen rivers, snow-covered forests, mountains, and dangerous winter roads. The journey became known as the Noble Train of Artillery. Against incredible odds, every cannon reached the Continental Army outside Boston. In March 1776, Washington secretly placed those guns on Dorchester Heights, overlooking the city and Boston Harbor. When British commanders looked up and saw powerful artillery aimed directly at their fleet and defensive positions, they understood the danger immediately. Holding Boston had become impossible. Rather than risk destruction, British forces evacuated the city on March 17, 1776, giving the Americans one of their first major strategic victories of the Revolutionary War. The story of Fort Ticonderoga did not end there. In 1777, British General John Burgoyne advanced south from Canada with a large army. American defenders discovered that nearby high ground overlooked the fort, allowing British artillery to threaten the position. Recognizing that they could not hold the fortress under constant bombardment, General Arthur St. Clair ordered an evacuation. Many Americans criticized the decision, and St. Clair was later court-martialed. However, the investigation ultimately cleared him of wrongdoing, concluding that remaining inside the fort would likely have ended in disaster. Today, Fort Ticonderoga has been carefully restored as one of America's most important historic landmarks. Visitors can walk along its stone walls, explore its barracks, and look out across the peaceful waters of Lake Champlain. It is difficult to imagine that this quiet landscape once stood at the center of an empire's struggle for control of North America. History often celebrates enormous battles involving thousands of soldiers. Yet sometimes, the future changes because fewer than 100 determined people act with perfect timing, careful planning, and extraordinary courage. Before sunrise on a calm morning in May 1775, a silent crossing over dark water changed the course of the American Revolution and helped shape the future of a new nation. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more incredible true stories from history.